The next item on our agenda is the Access and Attainment Report. Now, you all had to pay attention to this. This is a lot of work went into this, and Interim Chancellor Ignatius is going to give the report.
There we go. Okay. It's been about a year and a half. May 2012, Dean Colson sent out a letter to commission members sort of outlining the charge of the mission. And the commission took off and didn't, I think, draw a breath in the following 18 months. The purpose of the commission was to really, I mean, it was called the Commission on Access and Educational Attainment for a reason. We were looking at some broad-based questions that will provide us the opportunity to steer higher education in the direction that aligns with the state's highest needs. I will say this before I get into the presentation. Very few states get to this point where they actually truly perform the steering function. And that's what this commission set out to do. The commission members, as you can see up here, chaired by Dean Colson, Marshall Kreiser, our chancellor, incoming chancellor, Tom Kuntz on the board, Wendy Link, and then we also had Susan Paragus, who is the president and CEO of the Florida Council of 100, former Representative Bill Proctor, and Kathleen Shanahan, who was a member of the State Board of Education. So, as you can see, it was a lively group, and they were centered on these guiding questions. These were the broad questions, and there are more detailed questions I'll get to in a minute. But essentially, this is what sort of drove the Commission's work. Will the pipeline of college-age students produce enough college-ready students? Should these new students attend our state universities, or is there a major role to be played by the state's colleges? Will there be any future need for additional universities or colleges to meet this demand? And will the increased demand be evenly distributed around the state, or will some geographic areas be disproportionately affected? These were the broad guiding questions for the Commission's work. Now, you can't answer some of those questions unless you start looking at what the workforce needs are and how it aligns with the supply we have. This gets at supply-demand, which we talked about yesterday, or we got into a little bit. So there were some key gap analysis questions. We needed to identify how many students we're producing and where the occupational demand is going to be in the state, and where we're on target and where we're falling short. So the short-term questions were, what industries and occupations are projected to be in greatest demand in Florida through 2020, both statewide and by region? What is the gap between projected demand and potential supply for areas of undersupply, such as IT, both statewide and by region? And if we accept the Board of Governors degree projections, this is at the baccalaureate level, to 2020, which is 90,000 annual degrees, what is the potential demand for graduates in top occupations? There were some longer-term questions that the Commission also entertained. For example, does the Commission envision a more ambitious future for Florida with demand for higher levels of education for future workers? I will say now that the longer-term questions, we had robust conversations within the Commission about these, and that is part of next steps. There were no definitive answers given, but there's a plethora of materials developed that's available on our website that look at things like the fact that we're number 33 in the new knowledge economy, or index, and other factors that might weigh into thinking in terms of strategic planning in the future. All right. I hate to do this to you this early in the morning. Sip-sock crosswalks are not for the timid, but here we go. Because this is the heart of some of the work that the Commission did. The commission was supported by two groups of staff. There was a group of researchers from the Florida Council of 100, the Department of Economic Opportunity, the Florida College System, the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida, the Commission for Independent Education, and staff in our office. So this group of researchers met every 2 weeks on a Thursday afternoon from 2 to 4, and sometimes went longer, to work out this gap analysis. This is data-driven, detailed work, and it just takes concentrated attention. There was another group that supported the research, the commission's work, and that was the senior policy staff from this very same agencies, the Department of Economic Opportunity, Florida Council of 100, and all the education entities. The senior policy group would take the work that the researchers did and look at it through policy eyes, because sometimes that translation from research to policy gets a little muddy. So we had two groups that would sort of provide the work and scrub the underpinnings of the gap analysis that the commission would then work with. So I'm going to briefly try to explain the process. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. There are so many aspects to doing a good gap analysis. But if you start over in the left-hand column on the demand side, you'll see that employers in Florida indicated their projected hiring needs to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. And they do this through various surveys of public, private, for-profit, not-for-profit entities. Then these hiring needs are translated into the standard occupational codes. We affectionately call them SOC codes, established by the U.S. Department of Labor, and they standardize data reporting then across all the states. So in column 2, these SOC codes, occupational codes, at the 6-digit level, which is pretty fine-grained, are aligned with related educational SIP codes. SIP stands for Classification of Instructional Programs. And this is at the 6-digit level, and we use the National Crosswalk Center. Years and years ago, the Department of Labor created their classification for occupational systems, and years ago, the Department of Education created their classification of educational programs. They didn't really talk to each other when they did this. That's why you need a crosswalk. Let me give you an example. A high school principal is classified as an educator in an education SIP code, but classified as a manager or a supervisor as an occupation. So you have to be able to do this crosswalk, which is why the researchers spent so much time doing this. If you look at column 3, all of the educational institutions in the country that receive Title IV financial aid are required to report data to the Department of Education using these SIP codes, these national codes. And then they're reported into a database called the IPEDS, Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. In column 4, the educational supply by degree program SIP code can be compared against projected occupational demand by the SOC code using the SIP-SOC crosswalk. This is not a clean one-to-one comparison or relationship. In most cases, we rolled the 6-digit level up into the 3-digit SOC codes, and we had a defensible analysis. Nursing, for example, is one of those occupations that translates cleanly, but some others don't. For example, if a student majors in accounting, they might go into a variety of professions. Likewise, in the business world, you draw from a bunch of different educational majors. So if you start thinking about all the possibilities, you get these matrices that looks like multi-headed hydras, which gives you an idea of how difficult this work is. Somebody in the researcher group, and I forget who it was, made a good analogy. A SIP-SOC crosswalk is not like a thermostat, where you set the temperature at 82 degrees and that's what it is. It's more like a barometer that gives you the general direction. Okay, now that I really have your attention. Key findings of the group was the following. In general, there is sufficient capacity in the current system to expand as needed without building new colleges or universities. Why? There's modest additional capacity within the state university system, at some institutions more than others. Graduation rates are improving. We see that in the June work plans. You'll be seeing it in the accountability report in January. We're improving on our graduation rates. We're turning more enrollees into graduates, so degree production is growing there. The Florida college system and the independent colleges and universities of Florida are also adding baccalaureates, and e-learning is growing. UF Online and the Florida Virtual Campus. So we feel that there is sufficient capacity to reach the baccalaureate degree production goals that the state needs. One of the other findings of the Commission was that the state university system should work collaboratively with the Florida college system to expand upon demand in strategic ways. And, we've been having these conversations with Chancellor Hanna, with the Florida college system, about how to collaborate better. This is all part of the process. There's a quote in this final report. The final report that you have in your board packet is about 20 pages. We deliberately wrote that in a way that is accessible to most folks. We wanted it to be, we wanted to make this complicated process intelligible and understandable to a wider audience. I've given this to legislative staff. I've gotten their feedback. Governor's office staff, I've met with them and gotten their feedback. Folks like the report. One of the quotes that has gotten a lot of attention, and I put it on here, is, and I'll read it to you, gets at this collaboration across the system. Above all, expansion needs to be thoughtful and systematic. Without planning and partnerships, a possible effect is the creation of numerous weak programs that compete with each other, resulting in an unnecessary waste of resources. Such a reaction is neither economically nor educationally justifiable. All right, continuing on and going back, returning to our gap analysis, these are the critical areas that the researchers identified as gaps in Florida workforce. These represent projected unfilled annual openings that are more than 100 bachelor's degree. In other words, there are more than 100 unfilled openings in the state at the bachelor's degree level that go unfilled every single year. So for computer and information technology, that was our top occupation. Over 2,300 openings a year go unfilled. Accounting, financial services, and auditing was the next biggest group at about 1,000 unfilled openings. Middle school teacher retention, and I'll explain that in a minute, almost 1,000. And then it drops down, training and development specialists around 350, operations research analysts 200, kindergarten teachers, industrial engineers, and medical and clin lab specialists. Please keep in mind that this analysis is only at the bachelor's degree level. And I've gotten good questions about what about the STEM and why isn't health in there? There are needs in Florida, big needs in STEM health, but a lot of those jobs are at the associate degree level or the graduate level. And so they were not captured as well in this particular gap analysis. The researchers looked at things like the warehouse effect. We got questions like, well, if we're graduating students and they don't get jobs, and then they're in the pot for the next year, still competing for jobs against the new crop of graduates, does that have an effect? We looked at that. And we also looked at in-migration, out-migration into the state. So there was really pretty much no stone unturned in the discussions that the group had, which is why it took as long as it did. Okay. I would like to point out that some of the findings from the gap analysis raise additional questions and require further analyses. We need more drill down. Middle school teacher retention was one of those. And engineering is another one of those areas where we've gotten some excellent questions. You know, why isn't there is a gap in engineering, there is a gap in middle school teachers. Why is that? And so in the case of middle school teachers, we looked at school district data, and we found that we were probably producing enough teachers. The problem was we're not retaining them. They don't stay in the job. Some of the attrition rates in school districts are in the 80 or 90 percentile for that particular segment of teaching. So we're growing them, we just don't keep them. This is, we think, probably what's happening with engineering. These are the gaps. Florida's engineering employment is expected to grow between now and 2020, with about 5,500 additional occupational projections during this time period. And DEO has identified several subspecialties of engineering as high-demand baccalaureate occupations, and you'll see on this list. What we did, though, when we drilled down into engineering is, not surprisingly, and I think we all know this, engineering is a national, even an international market. And so our graduates are not necessarily staying with us here in Florida. When we looked at the subgroups, and you see this on this chart, the percent that we found in the data file that were employed in Florida are in the light bars. The darker bars are the ones that we did not find employed in Florida. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Another piece is that some of our engineers don't become engineers after they graduate. They don't stay in the field. If you look at that sort of blue bar, 28%, that blue slice of the pie, 28% of them enter non-engineering math or science fields. So this is the kind of analysis you can do with this gap work. You can take something that seems puzzling, you can ask additional questions, and you can drill down to get more information. The board STEM Health Committee that will be coming up will be likely drilling down and doing this kind of more detailed work in some of these occupations. Just to put on your radar screen, some of the things that the Commission looked at in terms of longer-term considerations for the state in terms of how many baccalaureate degrees we want to grow. We are 31st in the nation in terms of 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled in college. We're 37th in terms of the percent of the population with a bachelor's degree or higher. We're 40th in per capita gross domestic product, which has been linked to educational levels. And we're 33rd in the nation in terms of the knowledge jobs in the 2010 New Economy Index. So we have projections for now, but we also need to keep in mind what kind of Florida do we want in the future, and where do we need to head. The legislature has liked this gap analysis work. They gave us $15 million last year in the legislative session to support growing programs in the highest gap areas, and they were very specific about the highest gap areas. They gave us $15 million. They said a small number of grants. We want to generously support institutions to ramp up degree production in these really high demand areas, and we want to make them successful quickly. So we have appended with your materials a solicitation for grant application process. And it's targeting 4 to 6 grants out of this $15 million for the very highest areas: IT, accounting, auditing, and financial services, and middle school teacher retention. We worked the criteria on the grant application so that institutions that partner with other institutions get a higher score. There's 10 of the 100 points possible that are awarded for just partnerships. So if an institution gives us an excellent application and then another institution gives us an equally excellent application, but partners with the Florida college system or another university or an ICUF or maybe several, that partnership would win. Also, there are points built into the application for innovation, and that could be, you know, we didn't want to be overly prescriptive in defining what these things should look like. We felt that people within the universities and the regions would know better what fits their context. Here are the deadlines for the grant application process. The final report, which I hope you'll bless today, will allow us to move forward with the grant application process. February 3rd, the applications are due from the institutions. And then we're going to lock all the reviewers in a room and make them come up with a decision before the beginning of legislative session. Again, the legislature has been incredibly generous in supporting this work. We wanted to get back to them at the beginning of leg session and say, this is what we've done with the money. These are the people that we're recommending for awardees on the grants. The commission will continue to meet twice a year to kind of oversee this grant process. We've been told by the legislature that they're intending to support this for a second year, so there will be, you know, hopefully additional support coming in for another year on these high demand areas. In thinking where we can go with this gap analysis work, it's not, you don't do it once and it's done. We deliberately built this so that it's replicable, sustainable gap analysis. At the bachelor's degree level, it takes a while to graduate someone. So you don't need to do this gap analysis every year, but we probably need to do it every 3 years to make sure that what we're producing in the state university system, how that compares with what the state's highest needs are. We also need to consider development of future gap analyses at the graduate level. We kind of got into that yesterday, you know, in terms of, you know, what our graduate metrics are in the strategic plan and where we need to grow. We also talked about in the commission emerging and evolving occupations. The gap analysis that we developed deals with existing occupations, but there are also emerging occupations that are just starting up, and in a lot of cases, we don't even have SIP codes, education codes for these occupations. They're just beginning to appear on the horizon. Then there are evolving occupations which have moved along. We probably have some innovative new educational programs that address them, but they're still getting established. So that's another whole area. And the STEM Health Committee that will be established and off and running, hopefully in January, is really going to need to look at emerging and evolving occupations for Florida in the area of health. That concludes my presentation. I will only add that this is, even though this work has been difficult, it's probably in some ways been one of the highlights of this last year in being able to do this work. It's been enjoyable, not just the work itself, but the team that we've been able to work with on this whole process. It's wonderful when business, labor, and education all come together and work like this. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jan. A couple of people, Tom and Wendy, were on the commission, and you know, this is complicated stuff, but we're trying to figure out where the jobs are and what we're producing. And one of the things that was shocking to us is, for example, 47% of our engineering graduates, we're exporting them, leaving the state. So when we criticize our universities for not having enough engineers, it's not because they don't have enough engineers for the state of Florida. They've got plenty of engineers for the jobs in the state of Florida. So we need to be, this is the kind of analysis we need to know. So when, you know, so many of these jobs in a lot of the STEM fields only require AA degrees. They don't require baccalaureate degrees, or they require graduate degrees. And it was interesting, the Chronicle I got 2 days ago, the headline is "The STEM Crisis Myth." And and it basically says the Washington consensus is there is a broad-based shortage of STEM workers, and it's just not true. And so where we have to, before we push people into certain directions, we need to understand whether or not there are going to be jobs for those people when they get at the end of the pipeline. And there might be in certain areas of STEM, but in others, as you'll say, if you got a baccalaureate degree in biology, you have a hard time getting a job right now. Now, you can go to graduate school and get a job, but if you might have been better off with an AA degree in a specialized area if you wanted a job. So that's the kind of analysis we're trying to do, because we're asking people to spend a lot of money on these STEM degrees, and if we're not graduating people who can get jobs, and I think jobs is one of our goals, then we've got to rethink our direction. So anyway, that's just kind of my comments. Any other comments by the board?
I think this is an excellent piece of work. And by coincidence, with our breakfast this morning with the faculty, we're talking about what I would call leakage of our graduates out. We started with doctors, and we don't have enough residencies in Florida. So we create all these doctors, then they have to go somewhere else, and the statistic Barry goes, that 68% of them never come back. Usually find their spouse there. Same thing true in engineering. We create a lot of engineers, but we export them. Same thing true in forensic accounting. Those were just the three we talked about. It strikes me, Dean, that there ought to be some work to look at this whole subject of, we're spending all this money to produce all these degrees. How do we keep them? Where's the next linkage? So if we need to fund more residencies for medicine, then that ought to be something that gets on the agenda. And if it's engineering, how do we make that linkage? Otherwise, we're got all this effort and we're spilling it right off the side. And I think it doesn't take a lot to capture what we've already created.
Right.
And so it strikes me a follow-on piece of work would look at that.
Ed?
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, it was wrong.
Is this on now?
Yeah.
Okay. I reread this again last night, and I'd like to echo, it's a very well-done piece, very thorough, and I thought very objective, because I had raised in previous meetings my observation that the Department of Education had released a report that had shown different types of numbers. But all of that's disclosed in the appendices, both A and B, and it's very well done. I came away with a number of takeaways. Number one, I think it's critical that we stay on top of this. As you said, every third year, I don't know if that's enough. This is a dynamic wave, and it's being painted repetitively in 49 other states, and I think we need to stay on top of it. So I think the need to stay current is number one. Number two, collaboration with the state college system. I didn't see anything in here that was definitive. I didn't see anything that said we will meet on a quarterly basis with the state college system to ensure that blah, blah, blah. And you catch my drift.
No,
I didn't see that.
It's very political about how you do this, and we didn't want to lose the report over a political. It needs to be done. We need to sit down and decide how to do this.
Thank God I'm not overly involved in the political, but I am concerned about the discipline of collaboration. Without that, we're going to wind up with a significant, I think, amount of redundancy. My sole question was, in addition to a gap analysis, did we do a surplus analysis?
Did we do a surplus analysis?
No, we did not. We did not do a surplus analysis because, one, just in the sheer interest of time. I mean, we had the data, but we were focusing on where are the biggest gaps and where do we need to focus our efforts. Part of the issue in this country is if you've got a surplus of students in a certain area, we still have student choice of major. They can choose their majors. So the best thing we can do is get the information out in terms of where the gaps are to parents and students and say, this is where the demand is. We really, want you to look at this very closely.
But it would help if we can do it, to be able to say, and by the way, you got a 32% chance of getting a job if you're a sociology major.
To get back to Ned's comment yesterday about demand matching, By the same token, it also has to do with how we spend taxpayer dough.
That's right.
And the fact that if we're producing surpluses where people can't get jobs, and we certainly do a good job here delineating where the gaps are, if we don't match that, we're going to get a great deal of tax inefficiency, and we're not going to spend the taxpayers' money very efficiently. So I would encourage us, this is a great first step, but I think we need to evolve into a total view of the effectiveness and the efficiency of the system, meeting the needs of the state and balancing that with our limited resources.
We had that conversation, and it gets difficult because if a student majors in English, for example, a lot of them are snapped up by business and industry. So it's that multi-headed hydra thing I was talking about in the SIP-SOC crosswalk. You do the math and getting, here's your English major, that person could go into these various occupations, and then these occupations are drawing from all these different majors. Some of that gets almost impossible to calculate. So to say you got a 32% chance of getting a job, there's no way we can do it with that amount of precision.
But I could see you, for example, it being a new commission member, because you have some good ideas on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
on this issue, I think the residency issue is probably the easier one to solve, but the engineering issue, I think Vice Chair Hosseini and I yesterday had a good conversation about the gap analysis. And I think one of the problems might be the historical nature of the state employment, where it's more hospitality, tourism, at least for our area, and service industry based. And it may be important, particularly with the new chancellor coming aboard, to work with industry to try to transform our industry into manufacturing as well as into something more which is engineering based. I think there will be investment in infrastructure again, which we need to be on top of for engineering jobs. And I think what UCF has done with the medical city, that kind of investment in a higher technology disciplines may help in keeping the engineers in the state. But at this point, as the Chancellor, as Vice Chancellor said, it is important that we recognize it's an international market, and a lot of my students actually look for jobs everywhere. Their resumes don't just stay in the state.
And so a lot of this is a chicken or egg thing. I mean, do you produce the students and then the jobs get created, or do you wait for the jobs to produce the students? And there's no right answer to this. And it's and right now the industries are paying more outside of the state of Florida, many places outside of Florida, than we're paying in Florida for our top graduates. So we lose them, and we just need to be aware of all this. Any other thoughts or comments?
Just
Norm?
one comment. The one thing that comes to me a little bit is that I understand our need to press forward about manufacturing, engineering, all of these other things. But the reality is the state of Florida is a magnet for tourism. And we need to stay focused on the fact that we can provide the best program of tourism by having the best people supplying, that industry. The second thing is that while we talk about agriculture, we're an enormous state in producing agriculture. And so we still got to keep focused on how we do that better. And so what I saw in the report was we didn't talk about either of those things that are big drivers of the economy in the state. And my question is, was that because we didn't think there is a need there, or why wasn't that highlighted?
Some of it has to do with the fact that we were looking only at baccalaureate degree gaps. And some of the jobs in tourism and agriculture are at the associate degree level in particular. So, and anything that hit the list had to have at least 100 annual unfilled openings a year. We did read a report from UF about Florida's economy going forward, including aging baby boomers, my generation, and the fact that we are a tourism-based and traditionally an agriculture-based economy. The analysis pretty much said that, that the demand at the baccalaureate level wasn't going to rise to the level of making the target list here in the high gap areas. So I think it has to do with the level of education required.
Interestingly, we did, if I had to say, I think the school of business graduates and our marketing graduates are doing very well getting jobs in the state, and as opposed to where we lose all our engineering graduates to elsewhere. So listen, it's a first step. It's like everything else. But anyway, we need to accept the report. We don't have to adopt the report. We need to accept the report.
I'll move it.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, Jan. I want to introduce Jeanette Nunez. Where's Jeanette? Jeanette, stand up. Representative Nunez is the chair of the House Higher Education and Workforce Subcommittee. She's one of the stars of South Florida, and she has worked very hard to help our state university system over the past 2 years, and has been a delight to work with, and we couldn't be more supportive. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you indulging me for a few minutes. As you mentioned, Chair Colson, I have the privilege of chairing the Higher Education and Workforce Committee and have been able to work with many of you here in this room today, and it's been an honor to really be involved with some of the important policy-making decisions that have come out of the House, I must say, but certainly with our partners in the Senate. But I'm here today, actually, Chair Colson, to honor you as you finish your term. I have had the distinct privilege of knowing Dean for many years prior to my being elected to the House, and he's always been a tremendous friend, a great supporter, and in my opinion, a mentor of mine. So I wanted to take just a few brief moments to read this tribute to honor you today as you come to the end of your tenure. I know that you have done a phenomenal job, and I'm certain that the shoes, not only physically are large to fill, but certainly metaphorically. So I don't know if it's condolences or congratulations, but to the incoming chair, good luck. And this really is a tribute that I believe all my colleagues would join me in offering for you today. Whereas Dean C. Colson of Coral Gables began his 2-year term as chair of the Board of Governors of the State University System in January 2012, after having served as the board's vice chair and as a chair of its Legislative Affairs Committee. And whereas, under the leadership of Dean C. Colson, the Board of Governors has established the State University System priorities of improving student access, enhancing online learning, and balancing access, quality, and affordability, and has developed a leading model for accountability among public university systems nationally. And whereas Dean C. Colson, a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Miami School of Law, served as a member of the University of Miami Board of Trustees from 1991 to 2009, chairing the Board of Trustees from 2004 to 2007, and whereas, as a partner at the Colson Hicks Edson Law Firm, Dean C. Colson is among the top litigation attorneys in the country, and we won't hold you for that, and has made significant contributions to the legal profession and community as president of the Dade County Bar Association and a member of the Florida Bar Board of Governors. And whereas, I know it's a lot, you've done a lot, whereas Dean C. Colson has more than 30 years of leadership experience in various civic and community roles, including as a member of the Florida Commission on Ethics, chair of the Florida Supreme Court Judicial Nominating Commission, president of the 2003 Orange Bowl Committee, and chair of the 1995 Super Bowl Host Committee. Now, therefore, be it respectfully proclaimed that Dean C. Colson is recognized for his valuable contributions in the field of education and his dedication to serving the state of Florida, the legal profession, and his community.
Thank you. Thank you all. I wouldn't have given her the podium if I had known she was well, wait till you hear my final remarks. Facilities Committee.
Yes, sir. Dean, I've got 4 action items, and I want to talk a little bit about our workshop. So, at our last meeting, we proposed several amendments to the Board Facilities Regulation and Guidelines. No comments have been received, and these are now ready for final action. I would like to make a motion to approve the amendment to the State University System Board of Governors Debt Management Guidelines.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Next, I would like to move final approval of amendments to the following board regulations. Regulation 9.005, naming of buildings and facilities. Regulation 14.0025, action required prior to capital outlay appropriations. And Regulation 14.023, notice and protest procedures. I'll make that as one motion.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Dean, I'd like to bring the board up to snuff on a workshop that the Facilities Committee had on October 9th at the Tampa Airport. I was joined by committee members Huizinga, Chopra, Levine, Link, Morton, as well as Governor Fossey. The purpose of the workshop was to hear presentations by the universities of their selected high-priority projects and to engage in some question and answer and dialogue and to bring our committee up to date on what those projects were. We reviewed over 20 projects. We spent 5 hours, as I said. There was a lot of very intense and open discussion. It became clear to the committee that each of these projects are critically important to the future of each of the institutions that presented. And it was important for us to take a deeper look at the projects that were included. I'd like to say that it's going to be a big challenge for us to prioritize these requests and evaluate the board's LBR funding requests that we've already presented and the board's already acted on. At this point, my recommendation is that the board wait until January to take up any changes in that request. As we know, the PICO estimates will change. There are some new revenue estimates that will happen, and so we've already made a determination that critical deferred maintenance has got some PICO funds that will be available so that we can use it for that. So, and there's one other change that might happen. Some of the presidents agreed that they may change their recommendations to this board and request different dollar amounts and that kind of thing. So they've got to go back to their board of trustees to resubmit some of that. So in January we'll take up these new projects. If there are any comments from any of the board members.
Well, I had a question. And I want to thank you for having that Facilities Committee workshop. We know that the PICO situation may be a little bit better, but it's still not going to be good. So the problem of funding for investment in our capital stock has not been solved. So, is there any chance the legislature will take up for reconsideration the recommendations of your Facilities Task Force?
Yes, we're very hopeful that the one item that we were very disappointed in last year was the P3 legislation. That legislation happened for the rest of the government agencies around the state, but for some reason the Board of Governors was left out of that legislation. I mean, the university system was left out, and we think there's a good chance this year that we'll get us included. And that'll give us a tool that we've been unable to use in the past, and that will be helpful bringing in private investment into the university system. And I think that's very important. And the other thing I'd like to mention is there are a lot of proposals going around right now of creating some other revenue sources for PICO. There are 2 or 3 or 4 proposals being discussed. It's my opinion that this board really needs to help that process along. I can't tell you now which one is going to rise to the top and what eventually happens, but it's critically important, and the students have recognized that. Governor Fossey, thank you for your help on this issue, and so there's some things in the works, and it may help.
And what is our current capital request?
Our current capital request is $528 million, and that includes the PICO funds that we have will be 100% going to maintenance. We've got $280 million of construction funds that will come from general appropriations, basically. And all of those projects, almost without exception, are projects that already have been partially funded. So we're trying to get them completed and finished and started in some cases, so that none of the new projects that we reviewed are on our list at all. And the last piece of the puzzle is the $151 million for student-supported projects.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, we look forward to January, and
It's going to be an interesting session.
it's going to be interesting. We have the right chair for that session. Governor Levine, audit.
Put a piece of chocolate in my mouth, I'm sorry. Chairman Colson, yesterday, the Audit and Compliance Committee met, and we kept our meeting fairly brief. So a couple of items that we did have on our agenda. First, our new Inspector General provided the committee with an update on the corrective action plan for FAMU. As you guys will recall, the board staff developed a spreadsheet that summarizes at a pretty high level the findings from various audit or investigative reports, including the anti-hazing program investigation conducted by our Office of the Inspector General. Of the 30 items listed on the plan, 14 of them are completed and 16 are categorized as making good progress. Joe, our Inspector General, also updated the committee on recent activities completed by his office. He assumed the Inspector General position in early September, and he's gotten off to a great start, moving 100 miles an hour. By the end of September, he released the fiscal year 2013 annual report for our office, and a copy of it's included in your board meeting materials. And to meet his university colleagues and sort of better understand the operations of the university internal audit departments, Joe attended the fall meeting of the State University Audit Council, and he's also reviewed university annual audit plans and the more than 80 internal audit reports they have collectively released so far this year. Regarding our internal audit offices, Joe reported they have a structure in place to conduct audits and follow up on any audit findings. However, one concern that we've identified that I think is a relevant issue for the whole system, including our own office, is the retention of people with information technology expertise. The risk of IT, the risk of IT security and lack of audit controls is very serious and it's something we need to focus on. I also asked Joe to review our charter, both of the office and of the committee, and make any recommendations at the next meeting or by the March meeting in the event he wants to recommend any changes to that charter. With that, that's the end of my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor Levine. Governor Tripp, Academic and
Thank you,
Student Affairs.
Mr. Chairman. At the September 2013 meeting, the committee considered and the full board approved public notice of intent to amend Board of Governors regulations related to admission of undergraduate first time in college and transfer degree-seeking students. These regulations were provided for public notice by publication on our internet website for the required 30 days. No public comments were received, and the amended regulations are now presented for final approval. And with your permission, I would move approval of amendments to Regulation 6.002, admission of undergraduate first time in college, degree-seeking freshmen,
We have a motion, we have a second. Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, I would move approval of amendments to Regulation 6.004, admission of undergraduate degree-seeking transfer students.
We have a motion, do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
And I move approval of amendments to Regulation 6.008, post-secondary college-level preparatory testing, placement, and instruction for state universities.
We have a motion, we have a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. At its meeting yesterday, the committee approved for full board consideration a request by the University of Central Florida to offer a PhD degree program in criminal justice. The program has been through the CAVP Academic Program Coordination Work Group review, and letters of support have been provided by University of Florida, Florida State University, and University of South Florida because each has a somewhat similar program. The UCF Board of Trustees approved the program on September 26, 2013, and if approved by the Board of Governors, UCF will implement the program in the fall of 2015. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I move approval for the PhD in Criminal Justice, CIP 43.0104 at the University of Central Florida.
Thank you. We have a motion, do we have a second? We have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
The committee also approved for full board consideration a request by Florida State University to terminate its PhD degree program in physical education. The FSU Board of Trustees approved the termination of the program on June 7, 2013, and if approved by the Board of Governors, the effective date of program termination will be fall term 2013. Therefore, I move approval for the termination of the PhD in Physical Education, CIP 13.1314 at Florida State University.
We have a motion, do we have a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. The committee approved for full board consideration a request from the University of North Florida for limited access status for the new Bachelor of Science degree in radiography. Proposed minimum admission standards will not affect the ability of Florida College System Associate of Arts degree program graduates to compete for admission into the program. If approved, UNF plans to implement limited access status effective fall 2014. Therefore, I move approval of limited access status for the BS in radiography, CIP 51.0911 at the University of North Florida.
We have a motion, do we have a second? Second. We have a second. Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. And finally, the committee approved for consideration by the full board a reciprocity agreement with the Southern Regional Education Board Electronic Campus. The Electronic Campus serves as a means of providing nonprofit, regionally accredited colleges and universities with the 16-member state region, within the 16-member state region, with a mechanism to deliver online programs and courses to students across the region without the need to obtain additional state authorization from each of the member states. Approving the agreement will allow SUS institutions to continue to fully participate in the electronic campus. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the Southern Regional Education Board Electronic Campus Regional Reciprocity Agreement and to delegate authority to the interim chancellor, I think it's still the interim chancellor? Okay. To submit written notification of the board's approval to SREB, together with authority to renew the agreement at the expiration of its 3-year term.
We have a motion, do we have a second? Second. All right, we've got to participate, guys. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, there we go. All right, opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. And in closing, Mr. Chairman, I would also like to add that the committee continued its discussion of the approval processes for new baccalaureate programs. We had Chancellor Randy Hanna provide additional insight into the program approval process used by the Florida college system and suggested how the process might be better coordinated with the state university system in the future. It was a lively conversation, at the end especially. I have to thank Wendy for making sure that we got out on the table, and Randy understood it, that while we knew we weren't going to come to any conclusions in the committee meeting, it was important for everybody to know that not everybody felt the collaboration was where it should be, and that there was work we need to do in the future, and we're going to try and do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, strategic planning, Governor Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a full meeting yesterday, as you recall. But before I just give my little report, I just want to say, Dean, thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful book that you've given us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Signed by the Chief Justice, John Roberts. I mean, I think that's very special, and it's very special to me personally, because as you recall, Dean knows him as a good friend. I know him as a good friend, too. And we talked a little bit about the Frost Scholarship Program with Oxford. Guess what? James Smithson, who gave money to our country when our government didn't understand the whole idea of giving money to this foreign entity called our U.S. government in 1936, and he was giving a total of $508,000, which was equal to 100,000 gold sovereigns, and was put in the mint in Philadelphia. He said, I'm giving it to a country where democracy, I think, is in progress. It wasn't in his country where he was born, in France, and it wasn't in his country in England. But he was also a student at Oxford, so I've got to remind Professor Hamilton that James Smithson went to Pembroke College in 1786 as a chemist and a guy who knew all about minerals. But Dean, why this is an important book, because I want everybody to know that John Roberts also is the Chancellor of the Smithsonian.
Right.
So we sit on a board, and the board is made up of, and it was very, very well spelt out years and years ago, when I'm giving you this money, that it was to increase and diffuse knowledge to this country across the pond. And who would be sitting on the board? It would be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Vice President of the United States, a representative of the House, a representative of the Senate, and then whoever was the lead would appoint a few people, and then there were the people, like I had that privilege of heading all the Smithsonian boards. So, say thank you for this.
Oh, you're welcome, Patricia.
Okay, now is it time for me to give my report?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, but I had to put that in because I don't think Andy Hamilton understood that the Smithsonian really, maybe he did remember, but he had so many people to talk about. But yesterday, we really had a long meeting, thanks to Jan, who jammed it full with all the things we had to cover. And we did three really more informational items, and 3 items that the board today has to approve. In terms of the informational items, the committee considered the creation of a comprehensive education site inventory, which was presented just as an information item, and because we already have existing sites and they've already been approved, there really is no point for a discussion now, again, but that is one of the things we discussed. As a second informational item, the committee further considered whether certain strategic plan goals are really likely to be realized. And this is a subject that the committee will take up again in the future, and I'm sure over the next few months we'll be talking about it again. Certainly, Jan, you're going to be on again, whether you're the Vice Chancellor or whatever, again in January and in future meetings. The third informational item, the committee reviewed mission setting at the University of South Florida's regional institutions, how the missions are established, the extent to which mission setting is a dialogue between your main campus, USF in Tampa, the USF Board of Trustees, and the regional institutions. There's no need to rehash that again, but we did cover that, I think, in depth, and there are a few more things that need to be brought up, but not at this time. As an action item, the committee approved updating the board's program of strategic emphasis, following a similar methodology with the one used in 2008, as you recall. Staff reviewed the reports and the data produced by the key economic and workforce development organizations, both in the state as well as nationally ranked reports. Based on these sources, the categories associated with the programs of strategic emphasis have been updated, and degree programs offered by state universities have been reclassified in alignment with the new categories. So at this time, I move that the updated programs that were presented yesterday in program for strategic emphasis be approved. Do I have a motion?
We have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. As the second action item, the committee approved the preeminent state research university benchmark plans stemming from the 2013 legislative sessions. On June 10th, 2013, the board designated the University of Florida and Florida State University as the only universities meeting the established requirements. The legislation required each designated university to submit to the board for approval a 5-year benchmark plan for national excellence. Upon approval of each university's plan, the legislation requires that the board will award the university funds provided in the General Appropriations Act for this purpose. Upon the universities meeting these benchmark plan goals annually, the board will award an amount specified in the General Appropriations Act throughout the 5-year period. At this time, I move that the University of Florida and Florida State University, State Research University benchmark plans be approved.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. And the last action item approved by the committee was the Florida Center for Cybersecurity report. The language in the General Appropriations Act of 2013 requires that the Board of Governors submit a report no later than December 1st, 2013, to the legislature and the governor that provides a plan for the creation of a Florida Center for Cybersecurity at the University of South Florida. If funded by the 2014 legislature, USF will seek approval of the Florida Center for Cybersecurity as a State of Florida Center under the Board Regulation 10.015. So at this time, I would like to move that the Florida Center for Cybersecurity report be approved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is my report.
Thank you, Governor Franz. Vice Chair Hussaini, trustee nominating.
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to figure this out, sitting between two distinguished governors that know Chief Roberts. Who do I know? After thinking long and hard, I'm talking about justice, and I do know a county judge that retired 18 years ago, and a dear friend, and so. That's right. He's still working on.
Will it be signed?
But it has been an honor and privilege for me to work with our chairman. We've been partners, and we work together. When comes January, I will have the gavel, and that's when I really will talk, and the rest of us. So I invite everyone to come to our January meeting, because that's going to be the time I will respond to everything he put me through. So, and so we just want to put you on notice, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
With that, we had one item that we need action, and that is that I move that the board appoints Alexander Martins to the University of Central Florida for a term beginning November 21st, 2013, and ending January 6, 2016. This appointment would be subject to confirmation by the Senate and to Mr. Martins attending an orientation.
We have a motion, we have a second. We have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anything?
Thank you.
Motion passes. Anything further?
No.
Okay, Governor Coons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We had a good meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee, and an expedited meeting that we were happy to conclude early. We have several items requiring full board attention. The first is we have 3 amended regulations that we noticed at our September meeting. There were no public comments, and therefore I recommend and will move approval of the following amended regulations. The first is Regulation 7.003, fees, fines, and penalties. These are changes. This changes the date at which the committee will consider fees from March to June and clarifies that excess hour fee applies to first-time in-college students. The second is Regulation 7.008, the waiver of tuition and fees. This regulation clarifies the number of credit hours that may be waived for students classified as homeless. And finally, Regulation 9.007, university operating budgets, clarifies the reporting of carry-forward funds and the uses of education and general funds. I would move that we amend all 3 of those regulations.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
We have a motion, second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Second item, Mr. Chairman, we have one new regulation, Regulation 9.014, on collegiate license plate revenues that we noticed at our September meeting. This regulation is being created to provide guidance to the universities on the use of collegiate license plate revenue, expenditure plans, and instructions for notifying the board of any deviations from the approved expenditure plans. There were no public comments, therefore I recommend final approval of Regulation 9.014.
We have a second.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding performance funding, we have received, and the committee discussed, the recommended performance funding metric from each university. Each university submitted their choice metric. Each of theirs was approved by their Board of Trustees. Rather than read all of the metrics, I would refer the committee to pages 822 and 823 of our board package, which references each of the university-specific metrics.
So we have a motion.
I would move approval.
We have a second. We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in regards to that performance funding, just as information, now that we have approved those metrics in preparation for our January meeting, I'd like to ask our staff to, number one, finalize the benchmarks for each metric, particularly these board choice metrics. We're going to be updating the model to be based on 5 points instead of 3 points. This will give us a little wider point spread between universities, and utilize our 2012 and 2013 data to populate the model so we can see where we are. I'd also like staff to give us a scenario where there's a minimum score the universities must attain. They must attain to be eligible for new performance funds, and also consider methodology for which a portion of the university's base budget is reallocated based on performance using the model we have created, so staff should be preparing that. Finally, for action, Mr. Chairman, we had 7 universities request a total of 21 market tuition programs. As a reminder, this is a 3-year pilot program. This is the 3rd year of our pilot. The committee recommended, and I would move that we approve the programs as presented, and rather than read all of them, they are on page 824 of our board book.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor Coons. Well, now is when I get to make some final remarks, and I have 2 pages, so it's not too long, and but and then when we finish and we adjourn, we have to all stay here because we have to have a brief meeting of the Board of Governors Foundation to elect new officers for that, and it'll just take 1 minute. So today is a big day for this board, and I'm very proud of the board. We elected our new leaders, and I don't know how we could have done better. Before joining this board, I had never met Maury or Tom. Today I consider them dear friends, and I know they care deeply about the board as an institution, about the future of higher education, and about the well-being of the citizens of our great state. Similarly, although we lived the past decade in the same city, I've gotten to know our new chancellor only over the past 2 years through my work on this board. We have selected the right person at the right time. I'm excited about his leadership, his enthusiasm, and his lifelong commitment to the students of our state. We are blessed with an extremely talented and dedicated staff. We have been able to keep this staff together over some tough times the past 4 years, and I want you to know all of us appreciate each and every one of you. Indeed, what I will miss most about not being chair is my daily interaction with these wonderful people. We have lots of challenges ahead of us as a board, but I think we are positioned to meet them. Funding will forever be a challenge, and I'm sorry I never really got a hold on what I think is an imperfect financial aid model. We did begin addressing the growth issue in my report, in the report we heard today from the Access Commission. Frankly, my motivation for that commission was my disappointment, frankly disbelief, over how the Florida Polytech was created. Regardless of what you think of the need for a new Polytech in Florida, it's incredible that we watched its creation without any real analysis by this board or anyone else of whether there were statewide shortages in STEM degrees, and if so, whether the best solution was to create a new university outside of Lakeland. Hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent on this experiment in the next decade, and I suspect for a fraction of that cost, we could have incentivized our existing universities to increase their STEM production and generated just as many or more STEM degrees. We need to learn from that experience, and nothing I'm saying is intended to take away from the incredibly hard work and very talented people who are trying to make the Florida Polytech a success today. Our universities are fantastic economic engines for our state. It is not surprising, then, that many communities and their elected officials would like one. We should expect more attempts to create new universities, and on each occasion we should weigh in with thoughtful analysis. I am most proud of the focus this board has had on quality the past few years. I believe we have begun to influence behavior in our universities, and I think our university presidents welcome it. So far, we have accomplished change mainly with transparency, putting the relevant information out in the public domain and asking for improvement. I think we can only go so far with peer pressure, and hopefully we will see some significant performance funding this year. Money influences behavior, and I know our universities will work hard to improve on the metrics that Tom and this board have created. Because of all of you, our relationship with the legislature and governor is solid, and there exists, I believe, a mutual trust and respect. This has not always been the case. We are a very good university system with many centers of excellence. To be great, and we need to be great, we are going to have to continue to be strategic and focused, and ultimately, we're going to need more funding. I think the American Council of Trustees and Administrators got it right when they titled their very positive report on our system as Florida Rising. We are rising, and all the other states better watch out. Finally, I want to say there's nothing more important to this board than to maintain the independent role that the Constitution envisioned for us. We have done that, but it's not always been easy. One of the reasons I'm so excited about our new board leadership and our new chancellor is I know they share this commitment to independence. I am looking forward to continuing working with all of you for the next 3 years, our new leaders and our new chancellor. I'm going to sit out there next to Pam and Pat and Ed and Wayne, and I'm going to raise my hand and ask questions and drive Maury and Tom crazy. And that's what our job is, and I'm excited about that. It's truly been a privilege and honor to have been able to chair this board. I thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Wait a minute, second. Okay, motion means adjourn.